My fiancée demanded I sign my $300,000 house to her parents or the wedding was off. So I ended it first. But what happened next shattered her plans completely. I'm William, a 34-year-old who's been grinding in the consulting world for the past decade. 10 years ago, I was sleeping on my parents' couch in suburban Chicago, living off peanut butter and jelly sandwiches and cold-calling businesses in a thrift store suit that never quite fit right. That first year, I made a whopping $18,000. Barely enough to keep gas in my beat-up Honda Civic. But I had a plan. While my college buddies were partying and complaining about their entry-level jobs, I was building something. By year 3, I had my own apartment in Lincoln Park and a steady stream of clients who actually respected my work. Fast forward to today and I'm running a solid 6-figure consulting business with no partners, no boss breathing down my neck, and most importantly, no debt. That financial stability opened doors I'd only dreamed about. 3 years ago, I bought my first house in Naperville, a beautiful colonial that I paid off aggressively. Then I spotted an opportunity, a fixer-upper on Oak Avenue that nobody else wanted. I bought it, renovated it during weekends, and now it's my crown jewel. The rent from my tenant covers the property taxes and maintenance, while the value keeps climbing. That passive income? It's my ticket to early retirement. That's where I was in life when I met Stephanie at a networking event downtown. She was 32, sharp as a tack, with her own marketing career and this infectious laugh that could light up the whole room. Unlike the other women I'd dated, Stephanie seemed genuinely interested in my entrepreneurial journey. She asked smart questions about my business, admired my work ethic, and never once made me feel like a walking ATM. We clicked immediately. Within 6 months, she was practically living at my place, her toiletries claiming space in my bathroom, her coffee mug becoming a permanent fixture in my kitchen cabinet. After 2.5 years together, I proposed on the pier at Navy Pier, with the Chicago skyline glittering behind us. Her tears of joy seemed so genuine, so pure. She said yes before I could even finish my speech. We set the wedding for 8 months out, plenty of time to plan something special without the stress of rushing. Looking back now, that's when the first hairline crack appeared in what I thought was our solid foundation. But at the time, I was convinced I'd found my perfect partner. Someone who understood the value of hard work, who appreciated what I'd built from nothing, who wanted to be my teammate instead of my dependent. Man, was I spectacularly wrong about that. The first warning sign should have been her insistence on opening a joint account specifically for wedding expenses. On paper, it made perfect sense. Both contribute money, pay vendors from one centralized account, keep all the receipts organized. I thought it showed financial maturity, especially since Stephanie worked in marketing and had an eye for details that I frankly lacked. I deposited $25,000 to start, generous but not financially reckless for someone in my position. Stephanie added $8,000 from her savings. The plan was simple: venue deposits, catering, photographer, flowers, the whole 9 yards would come from this account. We'd both contribute more as needed, but that initial $33,000 should handle the major expenses. Here's where things got interesting, and not in a good way. Stephanie took control of the debit card and volunteered to handle vendor payments since she was doing most of the planning legwork. Fair enough, I hate dealing with wedding vendors anyway. I'd rather focus on landing new clients and let her manage the endless details of flowers, table linens, and whatever else goes into these productions. The first month looked completely normal on our statements. $2,800 to the Riverside Ballroom for our venue deposit, $900 to Thompson Photography, $450 to Blooming Designs for florals. Standard stuff we discussed and agreed on. I barely glanced at the smaller charges because I trusted her judgment completely. But then I started noticing some peculiar patterns during my monthly financial review. There was a $340 charge to someplace called Luxe Boutique that I didn't recognize. When I asked Stephanie about it over dinner at our favorite Italian place, she casually mentioned it was for wedding shoes. Okay, fine. Apparently brides need special shoes that cost more than my monthly gym membership. Next was a $295 charge to Serenity Spa and Nails. I'm starting to think my fiancé has more expensive taste than I'd realized, but every married guy I know warned me to just write the checks and stay out of the planning details. Happy wife, happy life, they'd say with that knowing look that suggested I'd understand eventually. The real wake-up call came when I spotted a $1,350 charge to some upscale spa called Tranquil Waters Resort and Spa. That seemed excessive for whatever pre-wedding treatments brides get, so I brought it up during dinner at home. "Oh, that's for my bachelorette party planning," Stephanie said, cutting into her grilled salmon like it was the most natural thing in the world. The girls and I are doing a weekend spa retreat instead of the typical Vegas scene. Much more sophisticated. I nearly choked on my pasta. You're paying for your entire bachelorette party out of our wedding account? It's wedding related, she replied with this defensive edge creeping into her voice. The bachelorette party is part of the wedding celebration. That logic made absolutely zero sense to me. A bachelorette party is a personal party expense, not a wedding cost that comes out of our shared budget. But I didn't want to be the controlling fiancé who micromanaged every decision, so I let it slide. The breaking point came when I discovered multiple hotel charges totaling $2,650, all for the same weekend, our wedding weekend. When I added them up and asked for clarification, Stephanie gave me this look like I was being petty about pocket change. Those are for my family's hotel rooms, she explained matter-of-factly. My parents, my sister Katie, my Aunt Linda, and my cousin Josh. They're all flying in from Phoenix for the wedding. Stephanie, we specifically discussed this. We agreed that families would handle their own travel and accommodation costs. That was before I really thought it through, she said, her tone becoming more defensive. My family isn't as financially comfortable as yours. They shouldn't have to stress about hotel costs during our special weekend. Your parents can easily afford their own room. Yeah, my parents could afford it because they'd spent 40 years making smart financial decisions and living within their means. Stephanie's parents couldn't afford it because they leased luxury cars they couldn't pay for and took Caribbean cruises on credit cards. But apparently pointing that out would make me the villain. We only have one wedding in this life, William, Stephanie said when I pushed back. Why not do it right? Why not make sure everyone we love can be there without worrying about money? That phrase, we only have one wedding in this life, became her justification for everything that followed. That phrase became Stephanie's golden ticket to justify every extravagant expense that followed. Upgraded flowers because we only have one wedding in this life. Professional hair and makeup for all 6 bridesmaids because we only have one wedding in this life. A string quartet for the ceremony because, you guessed it, we only have one wedding in this life. Meanwhile, Stephanie hadn't contributed another penny to the joint account since that initial $8,000. She was spending money like we'd hit the lottery while contributing nothing to cover the overages. I was essentially funding her entire family's wedding vacation while she acted like these were our mutual decisions. The joint account balance kept dropping. $28,000, $24,000, $21,000. At this rate, we'd burned through everything before we even got to the major vendors like catering and the live band. Every time I brought up the spending, Stephanie would get emotional and accuse me of stressing her out during an already overwhelming time. I should have shut it down right then. Should have had a serious conversation about budgets and boundaries. But I kept telling myself it was just wedding stress, that things would return to normal after we were married. I figured I could absorb the extra costs if it meant avoiding conflict during an already tense period. Biggest mistake I could have made because what I thought was just wedding overspending was actually Stephanie showing me exactly who she really was. And the real test was still coming. About 6 weeks before the wedding, Stephanie and I were having one of our Sunday morning planning sessions. We developed this routine where we'd sit at my kitchen table with coffee and wedding binders, going through vendor confirmations and guest RSVPs. Pretty standard couple stuff, even if these sessions sometimes turned into arguments about her latest expensive ideas. This particular Sunday felt different. We just finished updating the final head count, 152 people, which was about 25 more than originally planned because Stephanie kept adding distant relatives and work colleagues. I was internally calculating what that would do to our catering costs when she brought up something completely out of left field. I've been thinking about wedding gifts, she said, not looking up from her phone where she was scrolling through some wedding planning app. Not the registry stuff from guests, but what we give to our families. I was still focused on the guest list math, trying to figure out if we needed additional tables. What do you mean, like thank you gifts for the parents? Sort of, but bigger than that. She set down her phone and got this look on her face like she was about to announce something momentous. Your parents are pretty comfortable financially. They don't really need anything material from us. True enough. My parents are both retired teachers with solid pensions, own their house outright in Oak Park, and take nice vacations to Europe every year. They're not wealthy, but they're secure and content with what they have. But my parents are in a completely different situation, Stephanie continued, her voice taking on this rehearsed quality. They've been stuck in that same rental apartment in Phoenix for like 15 years. They've never been able to save enough for a down payment because rent keeps increasing and they had some credit issues a few years back. This was accurate. Stephanie's parents live in a decent 2-bedroom apartment, but they're essentially throwing away $1,500 a month in rent with nothing to show for it. Her dad works at AutoZone, and her mom does part-time bookkeeping for a dental practice. Nice people, but they make questionable financial choices. Always have car payments, take expensive vacations they charge to credit cards. Okay, I said, still not seeing where this was heading. What are you thinking? What if we gave them something that would actually change their lives forever? Stephanie leaned forward across the table, getting more animated, her eyes bright with excitement. Something meaningful that shows how much we appreciate everything they've done for us. The way she was building up to this was making me nervous. I set down my coffee mug. Like what? The house on Oak Avenue. I literally stopped breathing for a second. Just stared at her to see if she was joking. She wasn't. You want me to give your parents my rental property? Think about it logically, she said, like she was presenting a business proposal to a client. You don't even live there. It's just sitting there generating rental income while my parents struggle with rising rent costs every year. This would solve their housing problem permanently. I put down my coffee cup and really looked at her. Stephanie, that house is worth almost $300,000. You're asking me to give your parents a $300,000 wedding gift. She waved her hand dismissively, like I was being dramatic. It's not like you'd be losing $300,000. You'd just be transferring an asset to family. The house would still exist. It would just belong to people who actually need it instead of some random tenant. The casual way she said it was almost insulting, like I was being petty for thinking about the financial implications of giving away an entire house. I bought that property as an investment, I said, trying to stay calm. It generates $1,900 a month in rental income. That's over $22,000 a year in passive income. Why would I just give that away? Because we're about to be married, she said, her tone getting sharper. Because marriage means sometimes putting your spouse's family's needs before your own financial interests. Because it would mean everything to me. And what would you be giving my family in return? What's the equivalent gesture from your side? She looked at me like that was the stupidest question she'd ever heard. Your parents don't need anything. They're already comfortable. That's not the point, Stephanie. The point is you're asking me to make a massive financial sacrifice while offering nothing comparable yourself. I'm offering my love and commitment, she said, her voice rising. I'm offering to build a life with you. Isn't that worth more than some rental income? The manipulation was so transparent it was almost insulting. She was trying to make this about our relationship when it was clearly about money and entitlement. Stephanie, I'm not giving your parents my house. The shift in her face was immediate, like a switch had been flipped. The sweet, reasonable version of Stephanie vanished, replaced by someone harder, colder. That entitled edge crept into her voice as she started talking about my second property, like it was just sitting there waiting to be gifted. She didn't even try to sugarcoat it anymore. In her mind, owning two homes meant one was automatically up for grabs, specifically for her parents. There was no recognition of how I'd gotten to this point, no appreciation for the years I'd spent grinding while she was still figuring out her college major. Just the assumption that what I had built should now be redistributed to prove my loyalty to her family. When I stood firm on my position, her bitterness bubbled up fast. Suddenly, I was the villain. Selfish, ungrateful, cold-hearted. She acted like I was turning my back on the very people who had supposedly supported us. Though I couldn't remember her parents ever supporting my business or career in any meaningful way. Then came the manipulation tactic that made my stomach turn. She stopped pacing around my kitchen, fixed me with a look that was part disappointment and part threat, and said something that changed everything between us forever. If you don't sign over the house to my parents, the wedding's off. She threw our entire relationship on the table like a bargaining chip. Like if I didn't go along with this insane plan, it meant I didn't really love her. In that moment, I realized exactly who I was engaged to, someone who measured love by how much I was willing to sacrifice, not by mutual respect or partnership. To her, giving away something I'd worked years for wasn't unreasonable. It was expected. Anything less meant I was failing as a future husband. The silence that followed was heavy. We just stared at each other across my kitchen table, and I could see her processing the fact that I wasn't going to cave to her demands immediately. Fine, she said finally, grabbing her purse and keys from the counter. I'm going to stay with my sister until you get your priorities straight about what marriage actually means. She headed for the door, then turned back with this dramatic pause that seemed rehearsed. Call me when you're ready to be a real partner instead of a selfish landlord. The front door slammed behind her, and suddenly my house was quiet again. I sat there for several minutes trying to process what had just happened. My fiancée had just demanded I give her parents a $300,000 house as a wedding gift, then stormed out when I refused. The craziest part? She seemed genuinely shocked that I'd said no, like she'd expected me to just hand over my property without question. Like it was a reasonable request instead of completely insane. That's when I started wondering what other expectations she had about my assets after we got married. And that's when I decided I needed to do some serious investigating. Stephanie stayed at her sister's place for 3 days without calling or texting. Honestly, it was the most peaceful my house had felt in months. No wedding planning stress, no arguments about vendor costs, no dramatic sighs when I had to take client calls during dinner. Thursday morning around 9 a.m. my phone finally rang. Stephanie's name popped up and I almost let it go to voicemail, but curiosity got the better of me. "Have you thought about what we discussed?" she asked, like she was calling to confirm lunch plans instead of asking about a $300,000 house. Her tone was different though, less angry than when she'd stormed out, more like she was talking to a difficult client she was trying to close a deal with. "Yeah, I've thought about it," I said. "The answer's still no." Long pause. I could practically hear the wheels turning in her head. She probably spent the last 3 days with her sister and parents, getting them all excited about the possibility of free home ownership, maybe even planning where they'd put their furniture. "Look," I said, trying to keep things civil, "I understand you want to help your parents. After we're married, we can discuss ways to assist them financially. Maybe help with a down payment on their own place or—" "No," she cut me off sharply. "That's not what I'm asking for. I'm asking for this specific house, for this specific reason, as this specific gesture. Either you understand why this matters to me or you don't." The way she said it made my stomach drop. This wasn't a negotiation anymore. This was an ultimatum disguised as a conversation. "And if I don't?" I asked. Another long pause. When she spoke again, her voice was ice cold. "Then maybe we need to postpone the wedding until you're ready to be the partner I need you to be." There it was. The threat I'd been waiting for. "Give me your house or lose your fiancé." "Let me think about it," I told her. "This is a huge decision. Give me a few days to process everything." But I'd already made my decision. I was just buying time to protect myself. Her tone immediately brightened, like a salesperson who just got a customer to agree to think about the extended warranty. "Really? Oh, William, I knew you'd understand once you really thought about it. This is going to be so amazing. My parents are going to be so grateful, and I'm going to be so proud to have a husband who cares about family the way you do." The confidence in her voice was telling. She wasn't hoping I'd agree, she was expecting it, like the outcome was already decided and I just needed time to accept the inevitable. After hanging up, I sat in my kitchen trying to wrap my head around what had just happened. My fiancée had threatened to postpone our wedding unless I gave her parents my house. That's when I decided to make some phone calls of my own. First call was to my buddy Brandon, who's been practicing law for about 7 years. We went to Northwestern together, and he's always been straight with me about legal matters. I explained the whole situation. Fiancée demanding I gift her parents my rental property, threatening to postpone the wedding if I refused. "Dude," he said immediately, "run. Like pack your stuff and run right now." "Is that serious, William? This isn't normal behavior. This is gold digger level manipulation. She's literally holding your wedding hostage to extort property from you." We talked for about an hour about my options and what I needed to protect myself legally. Brandon explained how marriage affects property ownership, what community property laws look like in Illinois, and how Stephanie might try to claim rights to my assets after we were married. "Here's what you need to do right now," he said. "Document everything. Every conversation, every text message, every demand she makes. If this goes sideways, you'll need evidence that she was trying to manipulate you." That afternoon, I called my financial advisor and my accountant, explained that I was having serious second thoughts about getting married and wanted to make sure all my assets were properly protected. Both of them echoed what Brandon had said: document everything and don't transfer any property before the wedding. My accountant was especially blunt about it. "William, you've worked too hard building wealth to hand it over to someone who sees you as a bank account with legs. This woman is showing you exactly who she is. Believe her." That evening, I started going through my phone, screenshotting all the text conversations Stephanie and I had about wedding expenses and her family's financial situation. I also set up a separate bank account and started moving some of my savings there, just in case things got messy. The more I thought about it, the more obvious it became that Stephanie had been planning this for a while. The timing wasn't random. She'd waited until we were close enough to the wedding that I'd feel pressure to avoid disrupting everything. She'd probably calculated that I'd rather give up the house than deal with the embarrassment and hassle of canceling a wedding. What she didn't realize was that I'd rather deal with some temporary embarrassment than spend the rest of my life married to someone who saw my assets as her family's retirement plan. Friday morning, I started making some very quiet phone calls to wedding vendors. I didn't cancel anything yet, just asked about their cancellation policies and what kind of deposits I'd lose if we had to call things off. Saturday morning, right on schedule, my phone rang. But before I answered, I did something that would prove crucial. I started recording the call. "Good morning, babe," she said, voice sweet and optimistic. "How are you feeling about everything?" What happened next would reveal the true depth of her deception. "Still thinking," I told her. "This is a huge decision, Stephanie. I want to make sure I'm considering all the angles." "Of course, I totally understand. Take all the time you need." "Well, I mean, we do need to figure this out soon since the wedding's in 6 weeks, but I know you'll make the right choice." The confidence in her voice was unreal, like she'd already mentally moved her parents into my house and was just waiting for me to catch up to her timeline. "Actually, I was wondering about something," I said. "Have you mentioned this idea to your parents yet?" Slight pause. "We've talked about it, yes. I mean, I wanted to see how they felt about the whole thing before bringing it to you." "What did they say?" "They were incredibly touched, William. My mom actually cried when I told her you were considering it. She said she's never met anyone as generous as you. That told me everything I needed to know." Stephanie hadn't presented this as a possibility she was exploring. She told her parents it was happening. Probably got them all excited and grateful, and now she was using their emotions as additional pressure on me. After the call, I decided to do some investigating. Something about Stephanie's confidence was bothering me. She seemed way too sure that I'd cave, like she had information I didn't know about. First thing I did was check the security system on my rental property. I've got cameras on the front and back doors, plus one overlooking the driveway, mainly to keep an eye on the tenant and make sure the property stays in good condition. I pulled up the footage from the past week, just routine checking, and that's when I saw something that made my blood boil. Thursday afternoon, the day after Stephanie had stormed out of my house, there was her silver Honda Accord pulling into the driveway of my rental property. And she wasn't alone. 2 older people got out with her, and I immediately recognized them as her parents. I watched the footage of the 3 of them walking around my property for almost an hour. Stephanie had keys somehow, probably made copies when we'd done a walkthrough together months ago so she could see the investment side of my portfolio. Her mom was taking pictures with her phone while her dad was actually measuring rooms with a tape measure. They weren't just looking at the house, they were planning how to use it. At one point, Stephanie was pointing to different rooms, and her parents were nodding along, clearly discussing furniture placement or room assignments. Her dad spent 10 minutes in the garage, probably figuring out storage for his tools and lawn equipment. The whole thing lasted over an hour, and they were clearly treating it like a house they were about to move into, not a property they were hoping to maybe receive someday. But it got worse. I called the property management company I use for tenant relations and maintenance issues. I asked Jennifer, the office manager, if anyone had been asking questions about the Oak Avenue property lately. "Actually, yes," she said. "A young woman called last week asking about getting an appraisal done. Said she was the owner's fiancée and you'd asked her to handle it for insurance purposes." My stomach dropped. "Did she give you a name?" "Stephanie something. She seemed to know details about the property, so I didn't think anything of it. Was I not supposed to help her? Stephanie had gotten my rental property appraised behind my back. She'd impersonated my authority to get financial information about an asset I owned, without my knowledge or permission. That evening, I was still processing all this when my phone buzzed with a text from Stephanie. "Talk to my parents today. They're so excited about the possibility of finally having their own place. Mom's already planning her garden." Then came the text that revealed her true plan. "I mean, it's basically our house anyway once we're married, right? Community property and all that. This way, my parents get to enjoy it while they're still young enough to really appreciate it." That's when I realized I wasn't just dealing with manipulation. I was dealing with someone who thought marrying me would give her legal claim to everything I'd built. The next morning I started making calls. By Sunday night, I'd quietly canceled 90% of our wedding arrangements and made my final decision. Monday morning, when Stephanie called for her weekly check-in, I was ready. "So, what's your decision?" she asked, voice bright and chipper. "I've made up my mind," I said, cutting straight to it. "The wedding's off." The silence that followed told me everything I needed to know about who Stephanie really was. And what happened next proved I'd made the right choice. But that's a story for another day. Let's just say dodging that bullet was the best investment decision I ever made.